Thank you both for that lovely introduction. Welcome to Empowering New Technology, just with New Technologies. I've actually wanted to give this talk for a really long time, and I'm incredibly excited to be here. We do like a little bit of pre-lunch session stretching. You raise your hand if you've ever mentored someone in their first technical role. Cool. And raise your hand if you're looking for your first technical role. Nobody? Cool. That's awesome. I don't have to try to find anybody a job. And raise your hand if you've ever tried to convince your company to try a new technology. And raise your hand if you've ever tried to convince your company to hire new developers. Cool. You all are my people. And we're going to touch on all of those things today. I'm Rebecca, and I'm a Mozilla Tech speaker. About 3 years ago, I quit my job at a fancy New York startup that had yoga on the roof and started a virtual and augmented reality program inside a journalism school at a university. I am the emerging platforms lead at Northwestern's Night Lab. I do research engineering, prototyping, and some teaching. I work with journalism and computer science students, and between my students and my student staff, I've taught a lot of people to code in VR, many of whom did not really anticipate ever writing a line of code in their life. Night Lab is Northwestern's home for imagining the future of media. We're a team of staff and faculty who pursue a wide variety of media innovation projects. I have colleagues who come from data journalism and statistics backgrounds, colleagues that are focused on sensors and natural language processing. We cover a really wide variety of things. But personally, I'm focused on visual storytelling, especially for immersive media applications like virtual and augmented reality. And I am especially interested in building these kinds of stories on the web. So my team works in our device lab. We're about 10 people, depending who's on study abroad or internships or whatever. This is a super small subset of us out in San Francisco doing an informational interview at the Game Developer Convention. We're a really diverse and interdisciplinary team. We have first-year students, we have PhD students, and we have students studying everything from game design and media studies to psychology to journalism and computer science. And we make a really diverse variety of stuff, too. A lot of our work ends up being environmental, both because that's an extremely important issue that we're interested in, but also when we think about the kinds of stories that want to be told in VR or AR that are a really good use of that platform. Students quite often really hone in on stories where space and environment are very central, and those are quite often environmental stories. So that GIF froze on the most boring part of that scene. But furthest away is a room scale VR game where you try to protect your own coral reef from the effects of human activity. We've also made an AR game where you try to produce wealth for your community while investing in climate change mitigation technology to keep global temperature increase to less than 2 degrees. We've also done AR experiences that honor the history of diverse neighborhoods in our city. And we have a long-running interest in immersive infographics and data visualization. That screenshot I just love because it's really funny. It's from a prototype of a data visualization of what it is like to be in a room with 3 billion pizzas, which is about how much pizza Americans consume in 1 year. So whenever possible, we make this stuff on the web using WebXR. So who's heard of WebXR or WebVR? Cool. So the X, this is very confusing for a lot of people. It's just like a variable that just incorporates anything. It's mostly VR right now, but it's VR and AR. Someone once told me that it's like if you stack an A on a V, and I find that ridiculous. But anyways, you don't have to worry about it. So the WebXR API allows developers to support augmented and virtual reality in the browser. generally Firefox, Chrome, Samsung Internet. People have it in production. They make games. That Spot the Bot is a cool asymmetrical multiplayer game from Google where one of you plays on a phone, one of you plays on a headset. It's used a lot in VR advertising. It's excellent for 360 video. WebXR is really important for us in journalism because our mandate is to get the largest number of people to have access to our information. We don't want them to have to deal with vendor lock-in. Newsrooms build really lean teams. Newsrooms do not have tons of graphics developers just hanging out. I know this may be shocking. But it's very hard for them to ship multiple builds. But this isn't a talk about how and why to build things with WebXR. I have given that talk a lot, and it's super fun. But this is a talk about the lessons I've learned in 3 years of training new developers in this environment. When I'd been teaching with WebXR for about a year, I started to feel like there was something pretty fundamentally different about mentoring someone in an emerging technology code base versus a stable framework that I knew well. Sure, we were shipping working code less often, and we were in a special situation that allowed us to do that. But we were also getting to focus on some of the aspects of being a software engineer that are really important, but you don't often get access to in an educational or early career environment. I think that WebXR is an incredible tool for developing new technical talent, and the innovation projects are often better for organizations when they have new developers on them. So one of my favorite things about WebXR as an educational environment is that the skills are totally transferable. You don't have to work in VR forever. It's fine. They're just learning HTML and JavaScript, working with the browser and debugging. Virtual and augmented reality is just the product frame for how they're learning those skills and technologies. It feels pretty unfair of me to ask a journalism major who's just taking my course for 1 quarter to learn a big piece of proprietary software like the Unity game engine. Whereas learning a little bit of WebXR is just investing in fundamental digital literacy. By the same time, we're going to look at mentorship, innovation, and organizational train through the frame of my work at Night Lab, but I expect that your job is probably pretty different from mine. What I'm really hoping you take away from this talk are strategies about how you might be more effective in supporting new people and new ideas in your organization. And if you are a new person to technology, welcome. I think this will be beneficial for you as well. So this summer, I took a survey of 40 developers about their first technical role. Some of them were technical leads reflecting on experiences they had about 5 years ago. I deliberately sought folks like that out. And some of them had started as recently as 2 weeks prior. I wasn't surprised at all that many of the obstacles new developers face are pretty similar to those new technologies encounter while seeking adoption. Which brings us to why you should do 2 hard things at once: putting an early career developer on your innovation team. Early career developers and new technologies are both investments. Communicating that to your organizations and strategically providing places for them to grow is vital to their success. In both cases, you set them up for failure when you expect an immediate return. Has anybody heard that one before? I hear it a lot when talking to my peers. Junior devs always leave just when they get too productive. We're not allowed to think that anymore. We have to stop. When you don't plan for entry-level developers to stick around long-term, you make it so that they can't. If your junior devs are leaving, it's because you're not effectively managing their growth. I know that's really hard to hear, and I know that growth management is really hard, but it's the truth. People don't leave places where they're taken seriously and see opportunity. A big part of the reason that early career developers often have difficulty scaling their role with their emergent skill set is that we often isolate them in their early days. Only 10% of survey respondents reported spending any time collaborating with people beyond their immediate teams. 35% of my survey respondents reported that they did not have a more formal mentor in their first role. But even when we do pair junior devs with more senior developers, they're often very isolated. Only 20% of respondents reported collaborating with more than 2 people in their first 3 months on the job. When we isolate entry-level developers in this way, what we're trying to do is provide them with a safe space to learn the ropes. Unfortunately, this has the side effect of making it feel like they're not quite on the team yet, like they're in some kind of engineering cocoon and we're waiting for them to emerge as JavaScript butterflies, but that's not how growth works. That's why people leave and they get to be the butterfly at their next job. Isolation is also the biggest problem facing innovation or research and development teams. When we think about innovation, who do we think about doing it? Most of us probably don't have formal innovation teams. I've definitely worked in organizations where the way to make new stuff happen is to kind of prove out an idea during Hack Week and then sneak it into production. So when we think about new technology projects happening in our workplace, who do we imagine working on them? Is it this guy? Do you have to be an astronaut to innovate? Does innovation belong to that guy who built something important a really long time ago? No one's really sure what he does anymore, but he's super brilliant. Or is it a team of consultants that brought in from outside to drag your organization into the future, or whatever they decide that is? Hopefully not, because who's innovation for? Why do we innovate? Is it because it sounds fun? I mean, sometimes. But no, that's really tempting, but that is how bad and meandering, ineffective innovation projects start. We innovate because we know that we could be doing the things we do better, because we have to adapt to changing times, because our businesses change. Innovation is a service role. It's not a bunch of super smart people playing around with the coolest toys until something magic happens. It has to engage the whole organization and really take a big picture to look at how you currently do things. Isolated innovation projects fail because they don't connect with everyone else in the organization. This is where having a new person on the team can be extremely vital. New people don't know how things are done. They're great at asking questions, which is why it's so frustrating that we put them in contact with so few people. Out of all 40 of my survey respondents, only 1 spoke to a customer in her first 3 months on the job. This is the time when new hires should really be learning about the product. Have them do a support rotation. Let them sit in on some research. Introduce them to people from all across the organization. New technologists have the ability to look at your processes from a different perspective. And they also have a lot of leeway to ask very obvious questions. And obvious questions are central to the innovation process. The biggest opportunities for innovation are usually inside of the things that we take for granted and don't really think about anymore, because we do those things so regularly, so that's where the biggest gains are. No one is better positioned to research and dive into those areas than someone brand new. When you position a new engineer in a role like this on an innovation team, they start adding value from day one. When new people ask questions, they're more likely to get real answers. When you put a person with more authority in that role, the answers people will give will be more likely to be informed by how the person answering the question wants to be perceived. People are hesitant to tell their boss what's hard about their job, but they're often happy to tell the new guy what to look out for. Putting a new engineer on a new project greatly accelerates their path to expertise. They're part of a small team that knows all there is to know about a project that you're pursuing that is potentially going to become influential in your organization. People will start asking them questions, they'll know the answers, and that builds trust for them within the team, which brings me to the next point I wanted to highlight from my survey results. Many survey respondents reported that they had trouble understanding where their work fell within their organization's priorities. One of the biggest mistakes we make when onboarding inexperienced hires is assigning them low priority work that anyone could do. This makes the team view them as a perpetual beginner, at least until the next beginner is hired. It's also extremely difficult for your best people to be effective mentors when they're pairing on this kind of work. It's boring. They don't want to do it. But also, when you're very experienced, your knowledge of how to complete these tasks is so automatic that you might not remember how they actually acquired it in the first place. You also certainly are not up to date on what's the best documentation for first-time learners. In a healthier team dynamic, the unglamorous work is divided amongst the team, and effective managers look for opportunities for even their least experienced reports to develop areas of expertise. Emerging technology projects can be particularly effective for this because you don't have to know a lot in order to know more than most. So just as isolation and lack of relevance make it really hard for both new technologists and new ideas to succeed, meaning, visibility, and patience help them both thrive. Since they require the same inputs, doesn't it make sense to tackle them together? All right, so we just zoomed out and talked about how you might be able to create opportunities for new technologists to work with new technologies at any organization. For you, that might be a new framework or stack, or trying PWAs or a new kind of consulting. I work in immersive media, but the point is that there are gains to be made when an early career and experienced developer pair on something that's new to both of them and new to their organization. That was the macro view, so you didn't think you were just listening to this weird VR lady who wasn't saying anything you could actually use. But for the rest of the talk, we're going to zoom back in and talk about the things I've learned from being a weird VR lady for the past 3 years. So the first thing is that you won't get bogged down with tools because they don't exist yet. And of course, this one cuts both ways. I'm really excited that it feels like there is a emergent, interesting, and diverse conversation about tooling happening this weekend. You heard Glenn talking about the utility of tools this morning. I'm really looking forward to Carolyn's talk about tooling tomorrow. Because obviously, in a minimal tooling environment, things are slow, and you have to do a lot yourself. But tooling can be really confusing for a lot of people working in their first code base. In the survey that I sent around from last summer, one of the most common reflections from developers who were now like mid-level, who were maybe 2 to 3 years experience, potentially still at the place where they had their first role, was that they spent a lot of time debugging tooling that on reflection was either very simple, they just didn't have the context for it, or like their team had a hack for it that like everyone knew how to fix this local dev environment in the same way, and it just wasn't actually being communicated to them. I'm not gonna, there's a couple companies in there that emerged a lot. I'm not gonna call them out, but I will let you ask what they are privately if you feel like, or guess, because I think we all know. All right. So who recognizes this? Does anybody play this game? All right. This is Beat Saber. Beat Saber is incredibly good. If the Beat Saber folks put out a rhythm game library, I would use that in a second. But it's really hard to create consistently compelling VR content. And because we haven't really figured out what the useful abstractions emerging technologies are, working in WebVR forces you to work more closely with first principles. In an environment with minimal tooling, you spend a lot less time focusing on code that other people wrote. You know, you're like, what is happening is because of something you did, or because of something the browser did, but you know, that is the world we all must live in. And that can really add a lot of clarity for people who have less experience with working with third-party libraries. You get to be actively involved in technology choices. Because tools and libraries are changing so rapidly, I get to talk to my students about some things that are really important to being a professional developer in industry, but you rarely have the opportunity to encounter in an academic environment. We have had to have conversations where I've known that there's a new release that's going to make our lives a lot easier, but that it's coming out a week before their final. And we have to talk about the trade-offs involved in that and what that might mean in making the version bump. Personally, having a mentor who deliberately included me in making technology choices early on in my career has been one of the most impactful things in my time in tech. VR and AR are great because they make even undergrads feel old. I was talking to one of my students, we just started the school year. I was a student employee who's a senior now, and she's been with me for 3 years, and she was training a new first-year student, and she kept saying, like, oh, I guess we don't have to worry about that anymore. And that's just what life is like in the browser. There are so many things from when I first started making websites that we just don't have to worry about anymore, and so many new things that now we do. Emerging technology is a really condensed way to learn about the rapid rate of change and learning that are involved in a technical career, and to get used to not being too precious about your existing knowledge. A big part of the way that I choose tools is by looking for supportive communities that generate good documentation. And emerging tech communities tend to default to generosity, partially because of the people they attract, but partially for very pragmatic reasons. People don't know all the things, so they're eager to talk to each other and find out. It's a very nice way to grow up technically. And if you're someone who doesn't see yourself reflected in the technical leadership of other communities, sometimes it's a lot easier to imagine yourself belonging in a community where leadership hasn't already been codified. My team is very diverse. Last year, we were 70% women and non-binary folks and 60% students of color. So providing diverse role models for them is something I really prioritize. And on the one-on-one level, new developers working in XR get to hear their mentors say, I don't know, a lot. And it was in an interaction like this that I thought there was something special and worth capturing here. Because this felt very different than my own early career pairing experience. While I certainly have more domain expertise in WebXR than my students, so many problems have yet to be really defined, and so many tools are really unstable. But there's not a lot of knowledge that I just have at the top of my head. And that makes it a lot easier for me to make my thinking explicit to my mentees and focus on sharing strategies for learning, research, and debugging. It also really minimizes the hierarchical relationship that sometimes happens when folks with big experience differentials pair. In that survey I did, a few respondents reported feeling embarrassed in situations where they felt that their pairing partner was being withholding of information that they already knew, kind of like someone was letting them win at a game. Like, it's not fun having someone hover over your shoulder while you struggle to write a unit test. When you start from a place of both not really knowing, you're engaged in an act of co-creation. And co-creation is one of the most efficient strategies for helping people retain information. It's also really good to set the example that it's okay not to know things, and that that doesn't mean you're not an expert, and it doesn't mean that you don't know how to find out. In WebXR, you make a lot of weird stuff that is not as cool as you thought it was going to be when you decided to make it. And like, users use stuff backwards. Like, QA is bananas. It's wild out there. But it's very messy. And that's great, because the more that you fail, the less painful it gets, and the faster you can pick yourself up. I work with a lot of students who are very inexperienced at being bad at things. And it's so exciting to watch their perfectionistic tendencies fall away as they gain confidence experimenting. VR and AR are emergent technologies. Everyone is still figuring out what these things are for and how to do them well. The only way to move forward is to get out of your own way. And last, but certainly not least importantly, you get to feel like a wizard. I always feel a bit lucky that I got to learn about the web building blog themes and playing with Neopets when it still kind of felt like a magic treehouse that only a small portion of grown-ups really got. Learning to code is hard, and it takes a lot of persistence. And I often wonder if I'd had the persistence to stick with it, if I'd had to navigate all the tooling and learning choices that new learners contend with today. Not to mention, I started coding when the web was very ugly. Today, it takes a lot longer before you can build something that looks like what you see, what you would actually use in your everyday life. But VR is still something of a magic treehouse where really not everybody gets it. And if you've made anything at all, you're part of something cool and new and powerful. WebXR recaptures a lot of what made me fall in love with the web in the first place. And that's why I find it so compelling. All right, that's what I've got. Thank you for sharing your time with me. Thanks to Mozilla for helping me be here with you. I get to relax now, so if you want to talk about XR or leading teams or see pictures of my dog, please say hi. Thanks.